a lot of stuff. Dr. Tim's, his reading, and he was good enough to read it again, and I trust that everybody benefits from hearing it again, because it's new. Even on an instant replay, there's more stuff in there.
Building brain cells.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. And it's, I speak with hesitation because our Michael has not been contacting us, but my daughter said it's most likely that he will stay put. He may complain, but he's safe, and it's a beautiful place. And he's going to have air conditioning during the hottest time, and there are excellent resources around, and he doesn't really have any other choice. So he's being sort of forced to be safe in the physical sense. What he does with it mentally, I don't know. But she said, this isn't the first time we've dealt with people who have special needs, or they think they do. I know that Michael, when he was up here, I fed him a bowl of bean soup when he first came here, and he ate the whole thing and said it was so good, but then it made him sick. He had digestive problems, and we never fed him again. And I probably told you that, but he said it's because he's autistic. He has these strange food propensities, or he's finicky. He didn't use that word, but he said he can't eat this and he can't eat that. But that doesn't mean he was eating healthily. I mean, I would, when we've been cleaning up the basement, which was in a pretty bad way, and we found, chips and all kinds of stuff that's not that good for you, but he could digest that. So he's a mystery man in that sense. But I'm just thinking, my daughter said he'll be okay. He'll just be okay, and he'll probably get used to it, and he'll settle down. So
I'll join you in seeing that happen and making it easy for him.
Yeah, I know. That would be good. But so hearing Dr. Tim read, I thought, well, my assignment lately has been very easy because I don't have the lesson I need to learn right up in my face. I got a lesson, a respite from the lesson, whereas Dr. Tim stepped right into a family reunion that had some challenges, and that's a lot harder. But he was basically explaining that karma only applies when you're not in the presence or practicing the presence of love, practicing love, or however it was put. And you can feel how true that would be. But it reminded me
right up there with the gentle art of blessing.
Yeah, that's true. There is I wish I could find it. I've got the Bhagavad Gita here, a translation by our first teacher in the Hindu tradition when Tim and I were studying Hinduism, Swami Nikalananda, who was a tremendous scholar as well as a Swami from India. And he wrote a beautiful English translation of the Bhagavad Gita. And one of the verses, which I've memorized but possibly not totally accurately, is something like, well, I should preface it by saying Arjuna is going into battle with his own relatives in the battle of Kurukshetra. And he says, Arjuna, what am I going to do? This is insane. And Arjuna says something like, surrendering all action to me with mind intent upon the self, capital S, giving up all longing and selfishness, fight unperturbed by grief. There's so much to unpack there in that beautiful quote. I love the part, unperturbed by grief, because it's giving us permission to feel the human side of things, the grief we may feel at loss, or, in Gaza, watching those children who are being made orphans all over the place, and the little animals who are running, starving and stuff. We can see it. We're allowed to see it. But we're told, don't be perturbed by it, which is like Dr. Tim reading that Way of Mastery about staying in the loving, active, present state, or the present state of love, or he said it much better. But anyway, I just love that verse. And just as an aside, I came to find out our new rector at our church has decided to give us a set of sermons about telling about his own life and how he became a priest. And you can figure that if he weren't a healthy man, his stories might invite us all to see him as a victim of one thing or another. But it's not the case at all. This story is like, or when Dr. Tim tells about going to his relatives, it's healing for us, because it's saying, look, even though I'm really on this path and I really have most of it down, I still step in it and I have to do my work. And that's a wonderful acknowledgement of our humanity and the challenges. I've lost my train of thought. I want to back up and I can't find my hold there. Sorry, I got off my track.
Well,
My
let me
minister,
just offer a couple of thoughts. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
My minister was telling about his life, and turns out when he was in college, he left the church. Now, he's a gay man who was married to a wonderful man. He said, I felt straitjacketed in my parish. It was a fundamentalist church, and I couldn't be who I really was. And I just had to leave, but I didn't know what I was leaving to. I just had to leave. And I studied science, and I planned to be a doctor, and I was a musician all the way along. And he said, while I was reading the Bhagavad Gita in the Hindu tradition, I found my way back to Christ. But the Christ I found my way back to was so much bigger than any narrow Christ churches might be preaching. And I just thought, that is the weirdest synchronicity thing, that Tim and I had to go 10 years into Hinduism study before we could find our way back to our own tradition. And then we could come back with some kind of ability to discern what's really healthy Christianity and what isn't. So that's my spiel. So Michael, tell me what you were going to say.
I was just going to offer some feedback on that idea from the Gita that, don't be perturbed, which, of course, is a ridiculous directive, seeing as how we are resonant energy beings. If there's perturbed in us and the matching frequency comes up, there's no choice. I would hear it as, from the Gita, then face and deal with this so that you can free yourself of being perturbed.
I agree,
and move
totally.
forward.
Yeah,
because if it's in me, I'm going to draw it to me, and somebody's going to do it, and it's going to come up. There's no choice about that. And that's what I hear Arjuna asking support and guidance for. I have all of this pain and trauma about this battle, and what do I do? And he's getting instructions for his work, his healing.
Yeah, that's true. I agree. He didn't have those tools, but I trust he found his way.
Yes.
Ooh, what a life. Yeah.
I was actually in India about 30 years ago.
Wow.
And I was doing a process called Kayakalpa. And Kayakalpa is a medical treatment done in Ayurveda, is about basically dumping everything, turning the clock back and youthing. And I can remember there was one time period in the period where I was doing this Kayakalpa process where I covered my eyes, I covered my ears, I put earplugs in, and I didn't speak for 3 days.
Wow.
And I had been reading the Gita, and there was a point in that 3 days, and I, of course, had no reference to time. I didn't have a watch. I don't know what the time frame was, but there was a point where it was like the veil of my temple. My mind opened, and it went into The only way I can say, the only word I could offer is a puke. It just spewed and spewed and spewed and spewed and spewed. I don't know in that 3-day time period how much time it was. It might have been 5 minutes, and it might have been 10 hours.
Wow.
But I can remember that it was just like somebody opened the lid and said, okay, we're going to dump it out. And it was a monumental cleanse, monumental. And it wasn't that I was touching into specific things. It was just like this, had gotten into this energy space of doing a massive dump. And I think we have to give ourselves time periods to be able to do that. And we can't do that while we're running around doing everything culture demands of us.
Oh, that's so true.
It's time to come apart.
What kind of, was it grief, or was it all memories, or?
There was nothing specific that at the time I was aware of it, but there's nothing specific that I remember that I was cognizant of. It was just a massive dump of garbage.
How did you dump it? Did
if I were to give you, there wasn't a sound to it. I was just breathing. I was doing still point, and had all my senses shut down. If I were to give a metaphor for it, the closest thing I could say, it was like a volcano went off and just spewed all this garbage out of my mind, and it was literally, and I'm just recalling it now. It was literally coming out of the top of my head.
Wow.
The energy was just like a volcano. And, that when we give ourselves time to do deep levels of work, we can do, my take, from that experience and other experiences, we can do literally years of work in a matter of hours when we'll give ourselves the concentrated space to do that.
Mm-hmm. That's an amazing story. What was it like for you after that? Did you feel very different?
Just quiet. It was just like, there was very little activity of mind. I had a friend with me, a medical doctor, a friend that came with me, and he did it at the same time. And we had a little house. We were sharing a room. And it was just sat on the porch and just sat. There wasn't much conversation. It was very little mind.
Was he with you when you were going through this deprivation period where you were blindfolded and earplugged?
He was, yeah. Mm-hmm.
He was.
Yeah.
So, and were you? It sounds as if you had some kind of support. Therefore,
yes, we went. We were actually invited. A friend of ours, actually a woman, the only woman in the world who's ever been certified to do this Ayurvedic medical process, was a friend of mine, and she had been sharing some of my work with her teacher in India, a man named Pancho Bai, who was 113 years of age.
Wow.
And he invited me to come and do this. It's not something that the Indian Ayurvedic practitioner normally does with a Westerner. And this man had actually done Kaya Kalpa with Mahatma Gandhi.
Wow.
He had actually worked on Mahatma Gandhi. But he invited me to come, and it was kind of interesting because we built a small house in northern India. That's where we were going to do the work, but didn't realize the weather challenge. And Pancho Bai got on a train, and it was a 24-hour train ride, and came from Delhi. It was the first time he had left Delhi in his life.
Wow.
And he came up to work with us, and it was so cold, and there was very little electricity. We might get an hour or two of electricity a day. And we spent, it wasn't supposed to be cold, but it was, and we spent 2 or 3 days. He was quite frail. He was quite small, so he had a big challenge maintaining his body heat. And finally, after I believe it was 3 days, we decided to take the train back to Delhi and go to a place just outside of Delhi where it was warmer, because it was just too cold for him. Too cold. Well, it was too cold for everybody, but particularly for him. And it was interesting. I mean, we did a 24-hour train ride, and we had, I don't even remember now, there's 2 or 3 different trains we had to catch, and he carried his own luggage and took care of himself. He just rocked on at 113.
Wow, amazing.
So his son, he had trained his son in the Kayakalpa, and his son actually ended up working with me. So he was the support person.
Wow, that's wonderful. And you felt helped by that presence and enabled to go into yourself as deeply as you needed to, because or partly with the help of that person being there, right?
The whole environment was conducive,
Oh, that's great.
Oh, I probably would have never done it on my own. No, it was the whole environment was conducive. I mean, that's basically what the process of Kayakalpa is designed for.
Yeah. It sort of sounds like those psychedelic trips that you can go on, guided, carefully calibrated trips. Not that I'd ever dare to try it.
Yeah, there were no drugs at all involved.
Yeah, no, I understand. And you did it yourself. Yeah. You know what's amazing to me? That you had so much of this spewing, and to think that before you spewed, it was inside you, yet you were not sick, I assume, or maybe you were. But how sick we could get from all that, being in there.
Well, if you remember my history, I wasn't supposed to make it through my birth. I was almost dead 3 or 4 times first year of my life, and all the early years of school, the first 2 weeks of school, I was never in school. I was in an oxygen tent in the hospital. So I had a fair bit to spew.
Wow. What an amazing story. It's a part of your life I never heard of before.
I have searched everywhere on the planet for the principles and the tools of healing. And the best I've been able to find comes right out of the 1st century Aramaic Yeshua's mouth.
Yeah. Well, they've certainly been a huge help to me. So, as you know.
Awesome. Well, any other thoughts on your mind for today?
Oh, probably, but they're not right in front, so go ahead with your hour. Thanks for talking.
All right, appreciate you, young lady.
Thanks. You too.
All right. Well, Miss Jeannie, do we have anybody else on the phone queue with a hand up or anything happening in the chat room?
No, but I did get an email from someone. It's Colleen, and she says, Dear Jeannie, I'm holding a loving space for your family who are facing challenges. I just wanted to comment on my appreciation for something I heard in a recent show that I listened to this morning. The show came up in a YouTube notification, and I noticed I had listened to this particular show before. It was titled something about working with energy around parents and power person issues, and I could use all the help I can get around this, so I decided to listen to it again. Well, this time I heard something that I never noticed before. I understand to practice holding love active and present, along with my thoughts that I have about other person's words or actions that resonate and bring up my own negative feelings inside me. I've been practicing this and trying to develop this ability. I generally try to look on the words or behavior and think, what could be happening in this moment for them that brings them to say or do this negative thing? Then I usually notice that my perception cannot be trusted, as I was feeling something negative, so it's always possible I'm wrong about them. I think that those are probably good practices, but today I heard something that when I tried it, I felt like a door opened. Michael said to wish them a sweet experience in their day. When I added this, I actually was able to visualize the person in a state of joy and wow. Well, it's only been this morning, but so far I'm truly amazed at the difference. Of course, I am also doing worksheets, but this is more about my thinking in times when I cannot do a worksheet. Anyway, I'm grateful I got that tidbit on the second listen. Thank you both for all of your important work. I appreciate you. Blessings, Colleen.
Awesome. Yay, Colleen. Nice work. And that actually is a lesson or an exercise right out of A Course in Miracles. To hold that space, there's a variation on that exercise that's very powerful tool, and that is take someone that and bring to mind that you have a lot of energy around, a lot of judgments about, or what have you. Hold them, and then find someone that you really cherish, that you can really easily bring your mind to a state of love. And so now you're in that state of love, you're connected, thinking about that person that you easily go to love with. And then visualize the two of them merging and bringing that presence of love that you are easily connected to in the face of person A, and bring it to the space of person B that's such a challenge for you. And that is a variation on that exercise that also is very powerful. So delighted it's working for you and that you're using the tools.
And today was going to be Worksheet Monday. However, we didn't have anybody volunteer to do a worksheet. So Linda had her hand up just a second ago, but she put it down. But I'm going to turn on her microphone and see what she has to say. Welcome, Celinda.
Hey there, young lady. Oh, maybe she's not right there at her phone right now.
Okay. Well, then I would say just carry on whichever direction you feel moved. Unless somebody that's on the switchboard or somebody that's listening, call in to 563-999-3581 and press 1, and we will walk you through a worksheet or support you in any way that you need. And there are no hands up.
All right. Well, then let's go for it. So Jeannie and I were watching something the other night. I don't remember what it was now, but it led to me doing some research and came up with a Hebrew idea. And I'm tying this in because I've had people who've been saying, I want to know more. I want a bigger picture of the healing process underpinned by scriptural references. So what came up with this was a Hebrew word, bat kol, which was a new concept for me, although it sounded very much like the Aramaic ruka dekudsha, and it spoke of a divine voice, and that when we're ready for it, the divine voice instructs us. So it sounded a whole lot like the idea of ruka. And I'd done a fair bit of reading in this arena, came across a piece about forgiveness from the perspective of Judaism, and I thought this was really quite interesting. What their writing said was, the virtue of forgiveness can lead to divine favor, as illustrated by the contrasting behaviors of two different rabbis. And it goes on to say, the narrative highlights the significance of humility and forgiveness in the Jewish tradition. And so the story goes that a particular rabbi approached the pulpit of the cantor, and there was a lack of rain. And so this particular rabbi, Eliezer, put forward a prayer for rain. And it says he pronounced 24 blessings, yet there was still no rain. And later rose a different rabbi, Akiba, and merely said, "Our Father, our King, we have no other king from you. Our Father, our King, do for your own sake and have mercy on us." And the story goes that a rain immediately began to fall. And the scholars were like, wait a minute, this was the holy guy. He did 24 prayers and didn't get any rain, and this one guy just comes up and says this simple thing. What's the deal? And the response came from this divine voice, Bat Kol, and said, Rabbi Akiba is not greater than Rabbi Eleazar, but Rabbi Akiba practices forgiveness, and Rabbi Eleazar does not. I thought that was interesting, that the difference in whether we're in a clear enough space to invoke impact in the physical world depended upon how deeply we had cleaned out our own physiology of conflicting energies. And one who would refuse to practice cleaning that out is going to have a different impact on the world around them than the one who faces and removes those things that never belonged. And, it's kind of like an interfering energy disappears as one goes there. And so, as I say, I had a request or some conversation about wanting to get more aligned with the principles of healing from a scriptural point of view. To start out, we want to be clear that Yeshua, the man who's known as Jesus, and we're not talking about theology here. This has nothing to do with religion. The Greeks turned it into religion, but it's really about where and how one lives one's life. When I first came across the Aramaic language, my background was in physics. I'd had a degree in naturopathy, and so with the brain cells I had, when I touched into the Aramaic, what struck me is this is about physics and physiology, psychology and genetics. It's not about theology. And so much that has been put into his mouth, if he sat and listened to it today, he would say that's all Greek to me. And in John 10:10, he makes a really simple statement about what he's here for. He states his singular purpose, and it's not doctrine, and it's not dogma, but it's instructions on how to live as a human being. So he says, I am come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. Now, my offering is that life is active present love flowing through a cell. If we engage in behaviors that restrict the flow of human life, of active present love through our cells, then we are reducing the flow of life in us. So when Yeshua lays out what he's here for, what he's really describing is how to face ourselves, how to heal and be restored to our true minds. Anyone who's suffering is suffering because they don't know who they are. There are patterns and beliefs about self that are incompatible and block the awareness of who we are as human beings. That question we've asked, we've alluded to so many times over the years, that both Jeannie and I, whichever one of us happens to be opening the Why Is This Happening to Me Again workshop, the question we ask is, how many have ever held a newborn child? Go back to the moment you held a newborn and tap into the essence of that newborn. And of the tens of thousands of people all over the globe we've asked that question of, Everybody's answer is always some variation on the theme of love. It's purity, it's sweetness, it's beauty. Always some variation on the theme of love. And then, if we ask the person who's just tapped into the presence of love in that child, we ask them to determine, is the child loving you or is the child love? And everybody's answer is, well, of course, the child doesn't even know that I'm here. The child is the presence of love. So we live in a culture whose specialty is to knock that out of us, utilizing hostility or fear, and then along about the age of 14, 15, 16, 17, sending us out the door to find somebody to love us or find somebody to love, as though love were a verb. And it's not. It's a state of being. If we're chasing love as a verb, then we ignore the truth of what it is, and the truth of what it is what we are. So what Yeshua is offering is instructions and tools for how to face ourselves and be restored to the truth. So when I do my work, I get to resurrect from the mind of a painful suffering past. That suffering past has been created and or is a reflection of unresolved horrors of the culture, of old family dynamics, or what's held in the genes, and what's been imposed on them. At one point in the ancient scriptures, it's pointed out that the power of life and death is in our words. Words are frequencies that organize whatever they touch. Jump on YouTube and put in the word cymatics, C-Y-M-A-T-I-C-S, cymatics. Watch any video that comes up, and basically what they'll show is, well, it might be a pool of water, it might be a pile of sand, and then there'll be some source of a sound, and watch how the sound reorganizes or organizes the pile of sand or the puddle of water. All of a sudden, the frequencies emanating from that source literally start to organize whatever the physical substance is in front of it. If there are unresolved horrors within our family system, in our genes, and they're triggered into activity, and we speak from that, then those words literally, and when you watch these videos on cymatics, I mean, it's just amazing. They play a certain frequency, and you see this sand, and all of a sudden there's this beautiful geometric pattern, and every time they play that particular sound, that same pattern is repeated. Every time someone repeats a sound based in rage and guilt and grief and pain and drama and trauma, there is an impact that organizes their physiology. So Yeshua in John 6:63 says, "The words that I speak to you, they are spirit and they are life." So he's saying, I have a set of frequencies I'm going to invite you to engage in with your mouth. Because what you do with your mouth controls literally the state of organization of your physiology. What becomes organic? The raging, screaming mouth produces an organic structure consistent with raging and screaming. The mouth that pronounces blessings organizes physiology in the direction of those blessings. So Yeshua is saying, hey, there's a set of words, if you take them on, it will change your physiology. Basically, he's saying my instructions, if followed and eventually understood, they're not going to be understood at first because we've been brainwashed into all kinds of crazy beliefs. But in essence, he's saying my instructions, if you follow them, will be understood, and they will restore the love flowing through your cellular structure. And in essence, he says, I came to demonstrate the power of functioning as active present love and to show a suffering humanity how to heal. You know, you look at the experience of the Garden of Gethsemane, and after he goes through a major healing crisis so deep that he sweats blood, he steps out and meets the high priest servant. Now remember, Peter's there, demonstrate what not to do. Peter brought a sword. He's going to attack the high priest servant and lop off his head. Fortunately, he just gets an ear. I could easily imagine that Yeshua probably gave him the look at that moment. And he said, Peter, if you live by the sword, you will die by the sword. Whatever disintegrative energy you live by, whether it's with your mouth, it doesn't matter if that sword is your words or it's a piece of steel in your hands, if you live by that, then you'll die by that. So what happens? He addresses Peter, who's in resistance to what he's saying and doing, as Satan. He directly calls Peter Satan. Now, I've had people say he addresses Satan in Peter. Like, no, he's not really saying this to Peter. He's saying it to Satan, and Satan's inside. No. He directly speaks to Peter. And the Aramaic idea of Satan becomes very clear in this particular discussion. It's got nothing to do with the dude with the red suit, the tail, and the pitchfork. There's not a dude inside of Peter that he's talking to. He's talking to Peter, and he describes exactly what he means by Satan. He says, for you think in the mind of man rather than the plan of the Creator. You're stuck in carbon-based memory and the defenses and the realities of the culture that you were raised in. And then what most humans would consider to be the archenemy, the high priest servant, knowing, being as intuitive as he is and knowing what the high priest servant is there to do to him, you would think he'd be ready to lop his head off just like Peter was. But what does he do? He turns to the man who's been injured, even though he knows exactly what this man's going to do to him, and he offers him active present love and healing. He functions as a human being. He's demonstrating what a healed human being looks like. Now then he's taken away, he's tortured, and put to death. And, of course, everybody gets to tell the story out of the situation that they choose to tell. And most people tell a story because they don't have the brain cells for what was really going on, tell a story of suffering and crucifixion and death and blame, and it's your fault. You're the sinner who put him there. I can remember getting that message when I was a kid. You drove in the nails. Well, that's one message one could go with. But another message is, he tells Peter what he's really going to do if he's going to or needs to do if he's going to function as a human being, and then he demonstrates. He turns to the high priest servant as the presence of active love and heals him. Now, I've had people who say, well, Michael, that's an interesting interpretation, but did you notice that got him dead? And I say, yes, I noticed that got him dead. Did you notice they couldn't keep him that way? Come to demonstrate how wonderful suffering and death was, and how many people are still going around with those brain cells and suffering. I mean, you see at Easter time people carrying big wooden crosses and doing the whole suffering routine rather than being a blessing to the person attacking them. That's a much deeper piece of work you're going to have to do. To take the person who wants to destroy you and reach out and heal them. That was his demonstration. He wasn't showing the power of suffering through that whole process. He was showing the power of functioning as a human being, as someone who's healed, as someone who knows who they are. So he demonstrates the power of functioning as active love and shows a suffering humanity how to heal. And those who didn't have the eyes to see or the ears to hear totally misinterpreted and hallucinated a total false understanding. And the false understanding that they made up, they thought was about Yeshua. They're still telling the story now, thousands of years later, as though it were about Yeshua, rather than being about what's going on in their own minds. And the doctrines, the things that became doctrine for them, became what was going on in their own minds. Projections carried on as the Pharisees before them had done, in order to avoid the challenge of facing themselves and doing the hard work of dealing with converting their own pain, suffering, rage, attack, and fear-based minds back to their originally created love-based minds. They were the instructions he was giving. Now we see people who are still telling stories about the suffering rather than, he reached forward as the active presence of love. He healed the archenemy, and they couldn't keep him dead. Because he had converted his mind. He had detoxed his hostility and fear. So in essence, what he was doing was teaching how to overcome those unresolved generational patterns and reclaim the lost family birthright of love and serenity. Came to restore to humanity. That's what he was talking about when he said, my words. Confront the religious, the pious, and the supposed learned priests who are appointed to bring understanding and healing to people because they had not resolved the hostilities and fears in their own minds, became attackers of those people, condemners of those people. Why? Because they knew nothing of forgiveness, compassion, and love, and did not understand their own projections. They screamed fear, condemnation, threat, and punishment at those that they were appointed to support in healing. How many have ever stood in front of a preacher just railing and all of the terrorism you can imagine, pronouncing the humans in front of them as something other than humans? Why would somebody do that? Because they haven't discovered their own human lives yet. They're still functioning out of their own unresolved unconscious dynamics. Take a look at what's going on in the political world today around those who are supposedly theological teachers. They teach others to see sinners of anyone who's different than themselves. What Yeshua taught was when looking through the eyes of love, when Rahma was set, we could see fellow human beings that no matter what they were doing, no matter what was going on, they deserved to be held. And so those who have not faced or resolved their own internal traumas increase the trauma of the people that they're supposedly there to support. And with only the intellectual study of the same law that Yeshua taught, not having faced and transformed their own pain, conceive of nothing but punishment. due to their own projected guilt and the reflection of the pain in their own minds that were unresolved. There's that one particular story in the book of John where there's a woman who's caught in adultery. And how does he stop it? The one who has never sinned. So the first stone, remembering that the word sin is a word that describes the firing of an arrow at a target and firing an arrow at the bullseye and missing the bullseye. That's all the word sin means, is you're off the mark. So with this particular woman, he says, let the one who's never sinned throw the first stone. And when the accusers heard that, this is his way of saying, notice the projection. Every one of them had to slip away one by one. They disappeared. Hypocrites, not understanding the projections of their own unresolved suffering and pain, will always hallucinate a reason for some form of judgment. Now you'll notice in that particular passage with this woman caught in adultery, he refused judgment. And what's happening today? Those wolves in sheep's clothing are still proclaiming that he will fulfill their dark wishes at some future judgment day. This is the pharisaical mind that has no comprehension of what Yeshua taught. Oh, yes, filled with law, or what it perceives to be law. But unresolved, a mind void of forgiveness that has attack or punishment in it, when it's aroused, only knows how to attack or punish. Truly Christian mind is one that always functions from love and brings healing and forgiveness rather than condemnation and attack. And remember with that story of the woman who's caught in adultery, what does he say? After everybody turns away because they have to face it, they're all in projection. He says, neither do I condemn thee. And we could add to that, nor will I ever. Love has no capacity for condemnation. And yet those who have not done their work can only hear through the action of a parable. Matthew 13:34. All these things Yeshua spoke to the multitude in parables. Without a parable, he did not speak to them. In other words, everybody's trying to make things literal. There is nothing literal there. Those who have a mind functioning out of love don't need the parable. Those who have not faced themselves and resolved what's going on in their own minds can only have the possibility of hearing through a parable. So those whose mental history is that of a false self, impaled and built from guilt and pain and attack and fear, must be spoken to in parables. And if those parables point to the truth of an experience of love that's inconceivable for them, there will be the opportunity and the possibility of, through the parable, building the brain cells to come to comprehension. So one without a continuous access to the direct experience of themselves as love literally has no eyes to see, no ears to hear. Remember he said, those who seeing do not perceive, those who hearing do not understand. Because they're functioning out of a dissociated mind, and all they know is the projection of the content of their own mind into their brain's image of everybody else. So if one has no brain cells to experience the truth about themselves or others, then introduced to Yeshua's real work gives people the tools required to produce this result of remembering who we are. And remembering is an important key. You know, in that same passage where he says, you who having eyes see not, you who having ears hear not, he says, and you do not remember. Our human birthright is to not only remember, but have the experience of being surrounded by a community of humans, human equals love, who live from that true nature. When one lives out of a false, degraded mental picture of themselves, they hear and they see, put those words in quotes, everything through a mind that's foreign to the actual truth of life. A mind that twists every truth to fear and some form of attack, which is why over 300 times in the ancient scriptures, there is the directive, fear not. And unhealed minds rely on fear as though it's the breath of life itself. Until they've repeatedly, directly, and profoundly touched the experiences of their own lives as human, until they've repeatedly, profoundly experienced the presence of love in themselves, removing, forgiving, deleting fear, until they've repeatedly, when stressed, found the ability to express kindness and compassion over hate, when they've repeatedly been trodden upon and can express a blessing instead of curses, their own physiology begins to change. While others are warring with each other verbally, emotionally, or physically, maintaining a mind of serenity, repeatedly maintaining a mind of serenity, opens up whole new possibilities. Until one engages in forgiveness over judgment and peacemaking over foment. They will need parables. And that mind that's in need of parables tends to stay stuck in literalism. And there are those who want to put Yeshua in a category that he refused to go. In John 6:15, when Yeshua perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, he departed to the mountain himself alone. And you notice there are people out there who still want to do that. These are the people that are still stuck in a mind that has not worked through its own hostility or fear. So notice that, he has no desire to be a king, and those that he instructed to do the work are still beating that drum instead of facing and transforming themselves as he demanded. And those who are trying to force him into this kingly role, and it's all over this culture. Still trying to force him into a role that he ran away from, that he said no. When they tried to force him, again, it's really clear. When they tried to take him by force to make him a king, he departed into the mountains himself alone. And basically what he said to them is, why are you trying to make me a king rather than follow my instructions? Luke 6:46. Why call ye me Lord, Lord, and do not the things which I say? What is the true mind of a human being? Contrary to the weakness and helplessness in this sinner label that many want to reinforce and force us into, What mind are we designed to live from? What mind was he teaching us to return to? Go to Timothy, 2 Timothy 1:7. For God hath not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And then we have people preaching that fear is wisdom. And our time is just about up. So we'll pick up here with this idea in our show tomorrow. And in the meantime, invite everyone to have the best year yet of your eternal life. It's an awesome gift to give the world. Blessings.